My name is Garth Johnson. I'm the Paul Phillips and Sharon Sullivan Curator of Ceramics at the Everson Museum of Art. And I've already talked to a few people here who haven't been to the Everson for a little while, and I want to heartily invite you to the Everson. Thank you so much, Sam, for plugging our new Robineau display, and adjacent to that is a display of the Ceramic National Exhibitions, which I'm going to talk about briefly in my talk. But one of the main attractions that I want to invite everyone into has been brewing for 4 years, and that is the Everson's new cafe. The cafe is open. It is a partnership with the Rise and Shine Diner in Westcott, who does all of the vending. And the amazing thing about our cafe is that every bit of food, every bit of hot beverage is served in an incredible collection of handmade pottery. So you can literally eat this amazing food off of art in the way that the artists who created the pottery intended. And of course, that links to our subject, Adelaide Alsop Robineau, Syracuse's greatest arts and crafts figure, ? And this talk, I do this with a bit of a nudge and a wink, and there's a little bit of semantic wiggling in here when I talk about Adelaide Robineau being the most influential arts and crafts figure in Syracuse. I'm not talking about the arts and crafts movement itself. Absolutely, Gustav Stickley occupies that position of sort of ideological figurehead. And I'm so glad that Sam brought up Irene Sargent. I'd love to do a three-way battle royale about Adelaide Robineau, Gustav Stickley, and Irene Sargent. And I think we can celebrate everyone's roles. But I'm talking about the long tail. I'm talking about Adelaide Robineau's immeasurable contributions to society at large. I am a ceramics curator. I'm one of 3 contemporary ceramics curators in the entire country. Ceramics is having an amazing renaissance when it comes to their place in the art world, in museums, in Manhattan art galleries, but also a renaissance when it comes to handmade pottery. And all of this links directly to Adelaide Robineau and the way that she conducted her career and her genius. So Adelaide Robineau was born in 1865 in Connecticut. She was born to a father who was kind of an inventor and a salesperson, and the family's fortunes waxed and waned, and they moved all around the country. Adelaide Robineau is definitely a self-made person, self-made figure. She started off by learning porcelain painting, and she was a very important teacher when it came to porcelain painting, and she found herself in New York City by the late 1890s, teaching around the New York area, living in Manhattan. And that's when she re-met her husband Samuel, and together they began to forge the empire that they built. I wanted to briefly say, if anybody follows the Everson or me on social media, that we made a startling discovery last week, which is that the scarab base is cake. All right. So more than 10,000 people have liked and shared this AI image that we created. But it has it's shown some of the interest in the scarab base in contemporary society. All right. I briefly mentioned that Adelaide Robineau started off as a porcelain painter, and she was certainly trained in the art of the Victorian 4-stroke rose and all of the sort of traditional Victorian methods of classical china painting. But she was someone, in the music world, which I come out of as well, there's a term that I really like, and it's a compliment that you can pay someone by saying that they have big ears. Someone who can synthesize different movements, that likes to listen to an eclectic range of things. And that's absolutely Adelaide Robineau. And she, I think, as an artist, had a great mission, which was to open people in the very parochial porcelain painting world's eyes to the broader ideas of design, whether that was Art Nouveau, later Jugendstil. This is an incredible piece from 1897 that's in the Everson collection, so it's a little French porcelain blank. And the discordance between the shape of the vessel itself and what she's painting on it is incredible. So really a chrysanthemum shown realistic rather than stylized, but in these acid colors and certainly violating a lot of the composition rules that the futzy parochial China painting world, would have adhered to. So she started her magazine, Ceramic Studio, I think in 1898, with the mission of opening people in the porcelain painting world's eyes to broader design, and really starting her project of wanting to create her own ceramic vessels and control them from creation to the glazing. And she had aspirations in particular for working in high fire porcelain, which is some of the things that I'm going to cover. But she had very big ears as a designer, and you can view this piece in our display at the Everson. All right, so a revolutionary publisher. So Robineau starts Ceramic Studio magazine along with her husband Samuel in 1988, a few years before Stickley starts publishing The Craftsman. Ceramic Studio was published until 1919, and then it changes names and it morphs. But it was widely read. It was the ceramics monthly of its day. It was the most influential publication periodical for ceramics, and again, it like the Craftsman, it had an ideological bent to try and bring the world's design to, again, the rather limited aesthetic horizons of porcelain painters, and then encouraging the adoption of creating vessels and making ceramics sort of from scratch. So again, here's the first issue of the Craftsman, October 1901, and here's Ceramic Studio. And the Craftsman was an incredible work of art, amazing printing, but so was Ceramic Studio. Amazing full color, expensive inserts and printing, great papers. It's amazing to go through a stack of Ceramic Studio to see the amount of love and affection that they put into it. And Ceramic Studio, for its part, was profitable from day one. In fact, Adelaide Robineau made very little money from ceramics during her lifetime, but the magazine was always profitable and was the thing that allowed the Robineaus to live a comfortable life. So he was, from all accounts, an amazing support. So he helped to run the magazine. He helped support his wife and let Adelaide Robineau take the main stage. So he did come with a little bit of money that he had made through selling a farm in North Dakota, I believe, and they took that investment, put it into the magazine, and that bankrolled her whole career and their whole life. So I do other talks that talk about the sort of toxic atmosphere that Robineau created the scarab vase in, but her husband Samuel, I think, was an amazing supportive person who was able to kind of sublimate his ego behind supporting his wife's genius. One of my favorite things about Ceramic Studio, by the way, is, and you can go to archive.org and you can see almost the entire run and download the entire run of Ceramic Studio magazine, but the advertisements, I think, are one of my absolute favorite things. All right, so Robineau, one of the important things about her, and again, this is part of a larger talk that I do, is truly the American artist pioneer of using porcelain. I can't really find a single example of an artist who works with true high-fire porcelain before Adelaide Robineau. You can split some hairs about Mariah Longworth-Nichols in Chicago and the temperature that she fires to, but Adelaide Robineau, in the capacity of her magazine, starting I think in about 1902, reached out to this man, Taxil Doat, a French artist who taught at Sèvres in France, and asked if she could have his porcelain recipe, to which he replied, of course, and he sent along his porcelain recipe along with a 100-page treatise about the importance of true high-fire porcelain. Adelaide Robineau took his French recipe, translated it, found all of the American materials, tested it, and created the first successful true porcelain from an artist. Today we can walk into Clayscapes and we can buy a bag of porcelain clay. You could only get porcelain from a factory, and that factory definitely wasn't going to let you walk with the porcelain or their recipe. So when Adelaide Robineau figured out that recipe, she then shares it with the world via her magazine and made her recipe freely available. So she was open source before open source. Porcelain is a common material used by potters today, and we have Adelaide Robineau to thank about that. It's incredible that she only made her first vessel in 1901, and that vessel is actually in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And just 4 years later, she created maybe her first true masterpiece, which is the Viking vase, 1905, which is on view at the Everson. And I can't believe, so she took 2 weeks of classes at Alfred University. Everything else was self-taught. And she shared all of her knowledge with the world through her magazine. So the fact that 4 years after her first vessel, she was creating works like the Viking vase is astounding. I'm working with a scholar named Richard Moore right now who's doing research into crystalline glazes. Adelaide Robineau was also a pioneer of working on an individual model. If you were a successful arts and crafts potter, Van Briggle, Groovy, you likely had a larger studio. Adelaide Robineau tries this in the beginning. She tries slip casting, but it didn't feel right to her. So she reverts to throwing all of her own pots and creating every facet and not having a large array of assistants. She was sort of a one-person operation. Arguably, Adelaide Robineau is the third individual in the United States to have created crystalline glazes. And again, she shares a lot of her knowledge through her magazine. Here's one of my very favorite crystalline pieces from Robineau. As I mentioned, she is a studio ceramics pioneer, so it is very common for ceramic artists to work on their own. Robineau certainly thought of herself as an artist and blurred the line between artist and craftsperson, but she was the first sort of nationally and internationally acclaimed American artist to work on a strict studio model rather than having a larger operation with multiple assistants and designers. Here is her lantern from 1908, where you can see her trying out a lot of the techniques that she uses with the scarab vase. And this was meant to have a light source underneath it. And when it was shown in St. Louis, I know that it was shown with an incandescent light bulb in it. She was rangy. Again, back to the idea of having big ears. This was created in 1910, the same year that she created the scarab vase. You can see the rustic qualities of it. She's looking to other artists working in high-fire ceramics. She's looking to certainly Dedham and Chelsea pottery. And the odder that Robineau's pieces were, the more likely they were to have a name. So this is The Night Has 1,000 Eyes. She was also a pioneer in the United States of working with lava glazes, and this experiment was created the same year as the scarab vase in 1910. Arguably, her most important contribution to ceramics on the world stage is what I like to call breaking the porcelain ceiling. So in 1909, Robineau and her husband Samuel moved to St. Louis, and Robineau is one of the primary teachers at a school called the People's University, which was aimed at giving working women marketable skills. And ceramics, because of the proclivities of the founder, Edward G. Lewis, were prime among them. The other faculty members, chiefly, so we can see Adelaide Robineau here in the middle. That's Lewis's wife, I believe, to the right. Taxfield Doat, who gave her the porcelain formula, is here on the right. And then toward the left is Frederick Curtin Reed, who would go on to invent fiestaware and work at many important sort of industrial production, arts and crafts facilities, is also another faculty member. All of the male faculty members at University City occupied themselves by creating big World's Fair vases and showy sort of rococo pieces. And Adelaide Robineau had other ideas, and chiefly that was creating her career masterpiece, the scarab vase. People know it for the time that it took her to create it, which was 1,000 hours of carving, and it's incredible. You can see all of that labor if you look very closely at it. It's not dunked in glaze. The glaze is put on with a fine brush in every little discrete area to enhance the texture of the piece. It took a week just to do the glazing. And I do a whole talk about how amazing and improbable it was that the scarab vase has even survived. And that's a topic for another day. But the important thing is Robineau, as the University City experiment is sort of running out of money and collapsing, decides to make the leap, and she sends a grouping, I think of about 50 of her pieces, including the scarab vase, to the most important event on the international stage in 1911, which was the World's Fair in Turin. So the World's Fairs would make or break artists, and many American arts and crafts, potteries, tilted at displaying their wares at the World's Fairs. And Americans were generally thought of as backwater and less than and regressive. And Gruby, I believe, got some acclaim. Other artists got some acclaim in World's Fairs. But Adelaide Alsop Robineau was the first American potter to take the Grand Prix, the grand prize of a World's Fair. And that was in Turin in 1911. The first American ceramist, man or woman, to take that honor. And I can tell you that Americans are still thought of as innovators on the world stage when it comes to ceramics, and that's all down to Adelaide Robineau opening the door. So she breaks the porcelain ceiling for the rest of the world. This is interesting, and this is a whole other talk, but the Everson is working with a pair of technologists here in Syracuse. This is 3D scanning, and so we've been doing a very elaborate 3D scan of the scarab vase, which actually sort of broke AI's brain when it came to the complexity of trying to put all of these data points together. So look forward to us doing some study and sharing some new findings that we've learned through the very, very detailed scan that we've done of the scarab vase. So here's an image of the catalog from the Turin World's Fair, and then one of the pavilions, the German pavilion. Something that I think Adelaide Robineau doesn't get enough credit for and is not mentioned, she absolutely bled orange. So she was, after she returned from St. Louis in 1911, she's given an honorary doctorate by Syracuse University, and she founds the ceramics department at Syracuse University. And many of you probably don't know that today Syracuse still has a top 10 ceramics department with incredible grad schools, grad students, incredible facilities, and we have 4 full-time faculty on the ceramics department at Syracuse University. And then the last thing that I'm going to mention, and this is truly what makes Adelaide Robineau the most influential figure from the arts and crafts movement from Syracuse in my mind, which is what happens next. And that's all down to maybe a fourth person who we can't quite call an arts and crafts figure, but this is Anna Wetherell Olmsted, and she was the director of the Everson for, I think, 30 years, starting in 1929. She was great friends with Robineau. She knew about Robineau's importance. She had been an art critic for one of the Syracuse newspapers. She became the assistant director of the Syracuse Museum of Fine Arts, and when the director, Fernando Carter, unexpectedly passed away, she was hired as the director, not without controversy. I've read through all of the editorials in the newspaper asking how a woman could possibly do this job, but she did it very, very ably for 30 years. And she instituted the thing that I'm going to talk about, which has had an immeasurable contribution to American ceramics on the national and international stages. So in tribute to Adelaide Robineau, she decided to start the first juried national ceramic competition in United States history. They started in 1932, they ended in 1972, and the Ceramic Nationals built the career. They launched the career. It's absolutely indisputable for almost every major 20th century figure in ceramics starting in 1932. So starting with Wayland Gregory, Maya Grotel, Karen Carnes, Peter Volkos, who goes on to change the field. All of these artists get their first national exposure from the Everson. And by saying ceramic national, I'm not being hyperbolic. Every time, and this is all due to the work ethic of Anna Olmsted and her vision, every time the Everson, which was the Syracuse Museum of Fine Art at the time, mounted a ceramic national, it traveled to between 8 and 12 different museums around the United States. I can say that the ceramic nationals were experienced by most major museums except for the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So the Met, the Art Institute of Chicago, the De Young in San Francisco, the Philadelphia Art Museum, the Cleveland Art Museum, all of these museums were hosts for the Ceramic National. And for most of those museum audiences, this was the first time that their audience got to experience ceramics presented as art and not as design or craft. The thing that I'm going to wrap up with is another thing that I want everybody to take away, which is in our display at the Everson, we have this piece, which is Adelaide Robineau's cinerary urn. So she contracted a virulent cancer, and she passed away in 1929, but she created her own cinerary urn for her ashes and those of her husband. And she was someone who had incredible dry humor, and she always referred to her impending cremation as her final firing. But when you come to the Everson, Mrs. Robineau will be there with you as you take in the display, the most important display of her major works, which are at the Everson. If you take a picture of this QR code, this will take you to a mini site that will tell you more about the Ceramic Nationals and their impact, highlighting some of the figures who emerged from them. So I hope that these little bits from Adelaide Robineau's CV will give you an idea of my thesis. I'm happy to talk about this a little bit more. But again, the impact that she's had on the field of ceramics, which is really having an unparalleled renaissance right now, none of it could have happened without her. I've got 5 minutes, and so I think I would love to have more individual conversations. I'm going to give everybody a treat for being a good audience and sitting through this. The other day, I want to make sure that there's enough red meat for the arts and crafts base here. The other day, I was looking through all of the Everson's holdings of ephemera and scholarly materials from Adelaide Robineau, and I found a whole folder of unpublished images of the inside of her house, Four Winds, on Robineau Road. So it was great to share these with David, and David instantly was like, oh, look at this, and was calling out all of the furniture. Strangely, not much stickly furniture in there, if furniture at all, but a few choice pieces. So here's the house, Four Winds, and there was an adjoining studio. And so here is the interior. This is after the fireplace had been put in, and I think we've got some close-ups, perhaps, of the fireplace tiles. You can see family furniture as we were sort of unpacking. Here you can see a better image of the fireplace, some of the beams. I love hearing the muttering. The train spotting here is really incredible. You're giving me incredible fuel. And if anyone would like copies of these images or would like to access some of the ephemera and materials on Robineau, I would be happy to make that happen. I think she had 4 or 5 children. At the time that she made the scarab vase, she had 3 kids. And so think about this. It took her 1,000 hours. She had a 10-year-old son. Holy God, a 10-year-old son running around. She had an 8-year-old daughter, and she had a 4-year-old. And somehow she was able to carve out 1,000 hours to do this thing? Are you kidding me? So that makes her, just in that right alone, like a superhero in my book.
Are there any, surviving family members?
The family really, by the mid-'70s and through the Glory and Porcelain book, some of the family was still connected, but most of the family, the ties have sort of like been severed, and there's no current Robineau family member that's advocating for her legacy, which makes it important for me to do so. So.
So you don't